Hello everyone and welcome to the round glass review for the Tamron 20mm f2.8 Di III OSD M1. What does all that mean? It means this lens was made or released by Tamron. The focal length is 20mm, which is very wide. Maximum aperture is f2.8. Di3 means digitally integrated mirrorless specific design. OSD is optimized silent drive, and 1:2 is magnification to half-life size. Tamron introduced this lens in 2019. Its typical uses include landscapes and close-ups. Now, Tamron touts this, and this comes from their website, as the ideal first ultra-wide lens for any photographer. Now that said, this lens is not suitable for many of the typical wide-angle lens uses, like architecture, and while it could be used for astrophotography due to the technical performance, this wouldn't be my first choice. For your bottom line up front, every review you read will hammer on this lens's distortion, and then most of them will say something to the effect of, "But this is easily fixed in post." This review will not say that. This review will say that this lens has unforgivable distortion, and it's an absolute condemnation on Tamron that they would release a lens to market with distortion that was last seen in lenses of this spec before man landed on the moon. That said, this lens does have some really incredible performance characteristics in a technical sense, but beyond that, it delivers a stunning mix of color trueness and detail that are honestly hard to match. I just really wish that the distortion had been managed by Tamron during the engineering development of this lens at all. Your focal length and angle of view are 20mm and 94.3 degrees on full frame, 30mm equivalent, and 70.6 degrees on aps-c. The aperture range is 2.8 through 22. Element and group count are 10 and 9. The design type is retrofocus. Filter size is 67mm. Closest focus is 0.11 meters, which, in the US, since billionaire worship has become our de facto state religion, is 1/1155th of the Kourou, the most valuable yacht that flies under an American flag. Your drive type is autofocus, with Tamron's optimized silent drive motor, which is very quiet, though I can hear a faint gear whine from this lens in quiet settings when the autofocus is active. The native mount is Sony E. The dimensions are 64mm by 73mm, and the weight is 220 grams. Alright, we're going to jump right in here with distortion, and it is absolutely awful. It's not a compliment to say that this lens has almost as much distortion as the reflected skyline in the beam. It also gives very cool tone images with a color palette that skews toward blues and greens. Now this means that in post-work, when you are using automatic corrections, they will make your images very warm from those cool tone source images. Now, that to me is a positive because I tend to like warmer tone images. However, automatic corrections will also create images that tend to skew magenta when images have a green palette, and that is not a good look. Next, yes, this lens would definitely benefit from cameras having in-camera corrections for distortions turned on, and as I've been asked in this video series before, why don't I use that? To which I would ask again, why should I? Why should a lens designer rely on the camera maker and software to correct significant shortcomings in their lenses? The real question is, why are lens makers designing, greenlighting, and releasing subpar lenses that don't perform well out of the box? In-camera corrections stretch pixels, that reduces image quality, and that's not acceptable. One of the selling points of this lens is the very close focus point of 0.11 meters. That is admittedly a great focus point for a lens of this focal length, and I have often said in these videos that wide-angle lenses need closer focus. This lens does that, and Tamron deserved to have that acknowledged. However, as a general statement about lenses that certainly seems to be very true with this lens, distortion is amplified at close focus. This lens really amplifies the distortion up close. Lastly, one way to mask this lens's distortion is to shoot in portrait orientation. That leaves a bit less of the horizontal image for the distortion to be apparent in, and typically when shooting in portrait orientation, the vertical lines are more dominant, so that also helps to mask distortion. Starting with the fairy lights at infinity focus, this lens performs reasonably well here with very little apparent spherical element onion rings and reasonably well-controlled projection cat eye. This is mostly because a 20mm lens, even at f2.8, has a lot of depth of field. Changing to the closest focus point changes the story a bit. The larger, blurrier light dots amplify the onion rings from the aspherical element in this lens a great deal. Now that said, they are not as bad as we've seen in this series with other lenses, but they are a bit distracting. Projection cat eyes here are also more pronounced, likely due to the larger circles that we're dealing with. Going to the dots test chart, forgiving what is incredibly unforgivable screen tilt on my part with this image, the distortion this lens delivers is highly noticeable on this grid. This is on par with some of the 60s era Sigma ultra-wide lenses we've seen in this series. Again, not a compliment. Moving on, the balance of the technical performance is honestly incredible. At 100%, the center of the image is superbly sharp, with the monitor pixels being resolved in detail. The markings here are also very clear. This is a stunning performance. As the image reaches toward the corners, some coma and astigmatism start to move into the image, and the projection angle here bends those into little white astigmatism taco shells. Tacos. This is, however, not uniform and only really present on the left. The right side of the image performs significantly better with minor chromatic aberration. This performance variation likely indicates that one side of the monitor was slightly closer to the camera than the other. I suspect that the performance on the right side of this test shot, which is the better side, is more indicative of how this lens actually performs across the entire image field. Sharpness is absolutely fabulous for an entry-tier ultra-wide lens, and I've never felt like this lens let me down in that regard. Build quality is fine but not exciting. I place build quality on this slightly above the comparable Viltrox in terms of overall feel. Contrast is strong, and this lens really works best with even lighting. This lens will create images that contain a lot of image contrast in settings where other lenses would deliver flat images. Aperture stars start to become really apparent at f8. Wider than that, they have a strange, faint star and circular glow, and I've never really seen that before. Smaller than f8, they keep getting better, and at f22 they are absolutely stunning. Out-of-focus areas are, compared to other 20mm lenses and ultra-wides writ large, very good. The blurry areas that this lens delivers are not distracting from the image at all. They do add a bit in terms of atmosphere when the lens is wide open and focused very close. I'm drawing a blank on a comparably spec'd lens that has better blurry areas, quite honestly. Distortion is atrocious. I'm just going to leave it at that. Light loss is pronounced across every aperture, and when the lens is at infinity focus and pointed at a white computer monitor. In real-world use, I rarely, if ever, noticed it. Flare and ghosting are tested here, both with and without the hood. In both cases, the issues are minor. Both are present in both settings, but without the lens hood there is a bit more overall source flare and an occasional very faint ghost within the image. Honestly, by the standards of 20mm lenses, this is another remarkable performance. Balance with cameras is fine with anything that isn't super light. On a full-frame camera, this lens feels very at home. Hey, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one you'll probably really like too.